Candido HDR.
What's up, guys? It's Johnny Candido of Candido Training HQ. Is it really worth it being a natural lifter? I've been a natural lifter now for 20 years, exactly. Actually, I think it's 21, but we'll say 20. I've been lifting since around 12 or 13 years old, and I am a 33-year-old natural male. So is it worth it? But before I get into that, I do want to say that there is a sale right now, 20% off for Candido Training shirts, and that this will not be for sale after this for the foreseeable future. So for 10 days exactly, it's going to be 20% off and then done. And then I'll have other shirts in the future. So that's why this really probably won't be in the rotation for a very long time, maybe ever. So if you ever want it, Candido Training shirt, right now is the time to get it. Around $6 and change off. And again, it's over after that. But to get back to our topic at hand, is it actually worth it being a natural lifter? Now, I want this to be a fun video, just giving my opinion. And I do have a variety of kind of perspectives on this, being a OG of fitness YouTube in some sense. And also seeing the trends come and go. And right now, let's be honest, there's more teenage, late teen, early 20s type lifters getting on drugs than we've ever seen before. And you see guys like Togi, you see guys like Alex Eubanks, and then the trend only goes on way more to a lot of lesser known lifters. Because anytime an influencer does something, there's going to be so many fans who are going to latch on and emulate that behavior. And you do see it tend to correlate also with promoting gambling, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end of the video. But on top of that, there's also some valid reasons as to why that happens, right? There's reasons for temptations. And then I'll also give a perspective on what I personally regret with my own lifting, and then what I've seen other lifters do that I think was a mistake. Some of my peers who are natural. So I think this will be a fun one. So, okay. So the first point that I would like to make is that I do think it's worth being natural. That's the first one. So yes is the answer to the title. But secondly, I would say it's critical to have lifting be in phases and to have a variety of goals, because or else I do think it's not worth it. I don't understand how people just train for hypertrophy for 30 years and then by the time they're 40, just knowing they're not going to put an ounce of muscle on their body and then just continue on the same old routine. I actually think that is a mistake to do, which is funny to say because, obviously it's fine, but I would say that's such a redundant waste of time on some level that I actually think it would be better to have varied goals. And sometimes you can fall into routine so much that it actually, I would say, harms your life in other ways because you become complacent. Obviously, if that's absolutely what gets you going and you're a boomer and you just love it, you love just doing those cheat hammer curls with the 55s for the same time that you did 8 years ago. And hey, I can't judge. But I do think for most people, obviously that sounds very unappealing. The idea that you're just going to do powerlifting, bodybuilding, weightlifting, and then you're just going to reach this plateau and then you're never going to PR again and just keep doing it until you die as you get gradually worse. So a lot of people do not like that idea and therefore hop on. It's a very understandable thing. But what I also see on the other end of the spectrum, and this is where I'd say someone like Omar Isuf is a specific example where I think he actually did this incorrectly, is they vary a lot of goals to avoid this inevitable plateau by saying, okay, I'm going to do weightlifting here. Then I'm going to do powerlifting when it's trendy here. Then I'm going to also mix in bodybuilding for certain seasons. And the key point is I think that this is the correct mentality, but done incorrectly when you have to go back to what you left. And you see this all the time, and I'm going to speak from experience on this, is that I even have friends who are transitioning to the same period I'm in. Being 33, I have friends who are like 31, around that area. And I see what's coming is that it's very tempting to say, okay, I'm going to shift down a little bit and then get back to this. When you shift down at all, you're not going to want to go back. And I can say that from experience is the moment, I'll never forget this, when you skip a squat day and you're like, wow, that was great that I skipped that because I just had so much more time because you're dealing with other responsibilities, maybe starting a family, maybe you already have a family, whatever the case is. Life's not easy. in today's America, where the price of a home is absolutely insane relative to the income of 90% of people. So therein lies the irony, is that when you switch back and forth between goals, you actually create a higher time commitment for each of them, because it's not just, oh, you're a jack of all trades and a master of none. If you end up going back and forth in seasons, it takes you a lot just to get up to where you used to be. That's different than being, a generalist who's kind of always a generalist all throughout. And I've seen this with, again, another friend who, by all means, this is not to call him out negatively or anything, but with Tim Thibodeau. I think what he's doing with the running is great, but then every now and then he'll hit a deadlift max, and then he'll be like frustrated. He'll be like 500 or 550, whatever it is, 580, and he used to pull 660, and it's just like, why even do that? Just accept. It's done. It's game over. And that's fine. That's the thing. It's just, it actually elongates the time to try to get all the way back up to the strength you used to be at, because it takes so much work just to get to 95% of what you used to be at. And you already left for a reason, because you're not getting the reward per unit of time that's sufficient to maintain your dopamine and motivation. And sometimes you just have to spell it out in that mechanistic of a way to be like, that is why you didn't do it. Like, it always would be done if it makes sense in terms of our reward systems. It's like the book Atomic Habits. Like, a lot of times people burn out on a sport. Just go, like, why am I burning out? It's like, well, because you should. Because you're not getting as much out of it as you're putting into it. And that will not change if you just go back to it with a little bit of a fresher, rested mindset. But then you're still going to run into the same problems, and even worse. Because like I said, now you're going to have to condition yourself all the way back up. And it could take 2 years or more just to get to that point. Anyways, to give solutions here, I'm not just here bitching or complaining about people, is that I think the solution to this is to have a more timeline-specific setup for yourself. And it is funny because this correlates really clearly with how I've done it, but I would say for the most part, except for one point, I've been very happy with my lifting journey. And that is, up to the age of around 17, so you could say 13 to 17, whatever the case is, I would focus on athletics and then lifting to increase performance within a sport. So I think that's a great starting place. Obviously, when you're 17 and younger, I just don't even know if it's beneficial to focus on competitive powerlifting, or it's certainly not beneficial to focus on competitive bodybuilding. And we know that general strength has a great carryover to whatever you're going to do. So, I would say for sure not squatting 3 times a week or more. I would squat twice a week or less. And then you could just have one primary day, one variation, like my beginner program on the Can Do It Forever program, the linear program. So you could have one pause squat day, one, 3 sets of 6, just going hard type of day. Keep it very simple, but still also hit more isolations than a lot of people give credit. And I think that's a great way to start out. And you can obviously make tons of gains, as I did, very broadly starting out and still doing jump training, doing all this, athletic work on top of it, and build the base as broad as possible. We all know that that's what we want for long-term development. Now, the key point is, in my opinion, the best way to do it after this is I do think you should pick your avenue. So I do think from around 18 to 31, I do think you should say, okay, there is honor in committing 100% to a craft. So if you are going to, do powerlifting, and that's personally what I tend to recommend. Obviously I have a little bit of a bias there, but I would say strength training and powerlifting, it could be, strongman. It obviously could be bodybuilding, but I would say a strength sport, I think, makes more sense at this stage because you can make immense progress. And I actually do think you could peak earlier than people think. And that connects to what I mentioned in my top 5 powerlifters in the world right now video, is that a lot of lifters really are peaking at around 24. It's not, the old game of, oh, you peak at 40 or whatever. I would say that's probably closer to being true with bodybuilding, which I'll get to later, than it is with strength training. So I started squatting really at like 16. I'd say 15 years of the big 3, but then 10 years of competing is around the perfect sweet spot when it comes to strength sports and when it comes to powerlifting. And that's what's always surreal to me, is every now and then I see these lifters where some of them are so strong at 17. I'm like, I have literally been lifting longer than they have been alive, which is a wild thought to think. But now we enter the second last stage. So I consider 33 to 38 to be the final push muscle building wise. And the reason I say this is actually Jeff Nippard was a fantastic example. Jeff Nippard's 34 years old, which he didn't even emphasize in his video on building muscle this past year. And he put on multiple pounds of pure lean tissue. He did a great comparison video. I'm sure many of you have seen it, it has millions of views. And I thought it was very inspiring, and it was really well done. And it's a great example of someone who has been training, hard enough, right? I think he said that he's trained harder now, so there's that difference. But for the most part, he's put his decades in, and he can still build real tissue. And I think that this is the prime last push for exactly that. And that's where I think the white pill is, so to speak. And I also just don't see the purpose in competing in powerlifting until you're 35 or 36, until you truly may reach your actual ceiling, to where you actually start to get worse because you're getting older, not just because the training cycle went worse or there's things to adjust. Because there's already that, can happen when you're 26 to 28. It's not a guarantee that you're going to get better, across time, even up until 31. But I think that if you are going to continue to compete until 36, like I said, it is just a hard bargain the older you get, both that window is closing, and then also, even if you do hit that lifetime PR, because eventually you're going to stop, you're not going to see the fruits of that carry over as freshly onto the next step. And I will have a pure hypertrophy program on the Forever program, which I don't have yet, because that is what I'm doing now. So for example, it's 1 time a week on the lower body, and it's 5 times a week total. So I'm doing, basically 2 times a week, similar to upper push pull type of split. But I will say that there are certain slots where I do things a little bit differently, where I have, close grip bench, and then actually have bicep work after to pair, pressing with pulling, so that then you can really hit them with great intensity and hit the biceps a little bit more often, hit it more like 3 to 4 times a week, things like that. And I think when you mess around with certain setups like that, and you just make certain adjustments just ever so slightly different, you can make immense progress. And I think that, again, is another big white pill when it comes to natural bodybuilding, building muscle. Again, I'm 210 pounds now, and I've already built a tremendous amount of muscle versus what I used to do. And then when we go on to the last stage, so this is the stage where I do think is underrated, is 39 plus. It's the six-pack era. That's what I'd say. It all comes back to Mike Chang of six-pack shortcuts. Six-pack ab shortcuts? I forget what it's called. I think now people watching YouTube don't even know what I'm talking about. That's how crazy it is. But the real ones will know. Is that it is ironic how it's like after all of this, I do think what will matter the most is like, look, why not just have a six-pack for the rest of your life? And then by doing that and being natural, that will always be impressive. If you're 45 with a six-pack, that is always impressive. If you're 55 with a six-pack, that is, extremely impressive. I mean, that's one of the rarest things that you could possibly do, is be in incredible shape. And amongst all your friends, you will have that social status of being the most fit 55-year-old they'll ever know. And it's like, sometimes it does feel mind-blowing where it's like, we forget that, that's what it's all about. And you can get that naturally. It's like, no one, like, why do we care so much about this competition online and how people are perceived, and if people have unrealistic standards? Like, look, I have been called a "do you even lift?" probably 1,000 times throughout my life. Literally. I've probably been called it among the most of anybody because I'm uniquely strong and have been on YouTube uniquely early, before natural powerlifting was really a well-known thing. And then people were confused as to how I look the way which I still looked fine, obviously. But it was like, oh, how are you lifting this amount of weight and you don't look like a giant bodybuilder? And then, if I wear a loose t-shirt, people go, oh, you look like you don't even lift. And at the end of the day, it's like, it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Because in real life, you're always the super strong, super fit person. And then again, I think you should transition from super strong to then super fit over time intentionally. Because at some point, no one gives a fuck what you bench. At like 50. No offense to 50-year-olds who may, every now and then there's going to be someone comment, I bench 635 in a slingshot at 52 years old, 308 pounds. It's like, okay, I'm talking generally. All right. I noticed this recently when I looked on YouTube, and I was just like, what are the most popular fitness videos? Because I noticed powerlifting videos, in my opinion, are not as popular lately. And every time it's actually bodies that are completely achievable naturally, where you're just like, people are impressed with pretty much the bare minimum. But, being lean is obviously a demonstration that you do delay gratification to impressive level, and that you'll have, hopefully a long, healthy, beautiful life. So this gets me to 2 last points, and these are kind of spicier takes, is that, Zach Tellander, he uploaded a video where he's talking about AI, and he was talking about how if you ask it what's a fit body as a man, it spews out an answer. But if you ask it as a woman, or if you ask what's a fit female body, it won't give you an answer. But if you ask what's a fit male body, it'll show super jacked guy. And his point is that, the issues with the woman is that because it could lead to body dysmorphia, that's why it won't give you an answer. Whereas when it comes to men, it seemingly has a double standard. And there is some truth on that point. But also, who cares? Who's actually why does that even actually matter? And I understand, obviously in extreme cases where someone actually has a mental illness or a mental health issue, they need to get that taken care of. But broadly speaking, a lot of these points that we complain about, I'm like, is that real though? Does that actually matter? And you see this over and over again is a lot of videos on TikTok and on Instagram. They'll be like, this is a body after 6 years of training. And believe it or not, this is actually pretty good genetics. And it just looks like someone who looks moderately impressive, but someone who on YouTube and Instagram, people wouldn't necessarily, gawk at, right? And every time it's kind of becomes this doomsday feeling to a lot of the commenters, but just never hits with me because in the end of the day, you are going to interact with real people in the real world. And most people are fat and out of shape. That's just always true. So how can you even be convinced that you're not if you're interacting with enough real people? And I think that's the key point is, again, obviously if someone's literally anorexic to a level where they need therapy, that's a totally different animal. But we're talking broadly speaking, I think that we complain about things that are so minor that it only fuels the mindset of using steroids, is that we want to be admired by everyone. So it does piss us off if ChatGPT's example is more jacked than me or unrealistically jacked, and look at the example that we have to keep up with. We don't have to change the natural inclination to exaggerate. What we need to change is our temperance to be able to accept that doesn't have to be us. We don't have to have everything. And that connects to the last example I'll give. I thought it was very interesting is Alex Bromley made a video in response to Alan Thrall. And he was saying about how Alan Thrall explained his reasons to be drug-free. And he gave good reasons that I hold, largely speaking. And Bromley was disagreeing a little bit, and there's only so much you can disagree with someone's own personal reasons, right? But he was disagreeing a little bit in saying that, well, Alan came into the world of YouTube when the standards were a little bit lower, respectfully. And I agree with that, with myself as well, where if you squat 500 pounds, or if you deadlift 550 pounds, you're considered really impressive. Whereas now, it's a lot harder to get through. And therefore, would he have the same opinion as far as not using drugs if it had that higher bar to break through the industry? And I thought that was so telling because for myself, it's like, yeah, then I wouldn't be a YouTuber. I'd just do something else. You're not owed anything. You're not owed being admired for being strong or jacked or whatever the case is. If enough people don't find someone impressive or don't find myself impressive, it's like, okay, then get a regular job. You can do it. Any one of us could do a regular job. There's no gun to your head to use steroids because, and I think that's actually emblematic of a lot of this, is anytime you have to rationalize something by using a really extreme example, then that shows that actual action probably is immoral. And you probably do deep down know that there's something wrong with it. Because it's like if you said, well, hey, you're against OnlyFans, but you don't know if you really had to pay a mortgage, what would you do? It's like, okay, well, then that shows that that's probably not something you're proud of if we're coming up with hypotheticals to push someone to the brink to where if they would break their typical moral code. And again, this is not to say that people who are natural are better people or anything like that. We're all deeply flawed in our own ways, but and myself included. But the main difference is that in a lot of ways, I think there's this desire to make people respect natural lifters unrealistically. It's okay that people do gravitate towards actors who are on the juice, who are, rich and famous, who lie about it. It's not okay in the sense that we co-sign it, but that is how the world always will be, because that is the whole point of what temptation actually is. The whole reason with why temperance is important is because you are denying a benefit that you otherwise would obtain. Not to make it so that you should obtain the benefit because you're virtuous. No, it's the whole point is that denial. That is what sharpens us. So I mentioned earlier that I do have one big regret, and that is the fact that I truly didn't do any bodybuilding for such a long period of time while powerlifting. And I do think now we're seeing less of that, and that's why on the Forever program, I do have plenty of bicep work, around 6 to 8 weekly sets of biceps, even for just all the powerlifting programs. Because I think that's just such a, easy thing to just keep conditioned up so that then you're ready for that transition if it inevitably does come and you accept it. You accept this journey that I'm offering. But yeah, so due to that, I've been called, do you even lift so many times to where, I would be willing to bet probably I've had 1,000 comments insulting my physique throughout my life, which is funny to think. Like, it actually is funny to live through it. It'd be like, that is literally true about me if I really wanted to look up my name on Reddit and just read through all the comments on all my videos, especially any old videos or anything like that. And it doesn't matter. It just actually doesn't matter. Is that there is a value in being insulted, in being despised. And, what we should strive for is to not care, not in the sense of we say we don't care, but to really say, like, okay, yeah, maybe I deserve that. Okay, sure. How does that hurt my life? It doesn't. And I think the more people get over that on this deeper level of like, no, you should not have body dysmorphia because you don't matter that much. You should have humility, not because you're great and people don't realize it and nobody gets it, that natural lifting so much. It's like, no, it's okay. It doesn't matter. You are statistically better than everybody around you. Just go outside and interact with them and you'll realize most Americans are fat as shit. And you're not, so they're great, and if you are fat, then obviously lose weight, for your own health and for your family's sake, and to, to improve everything around you and to improve your own brain capacity and everything. But as far as this attempt to lower people's expectations so that they're impressed with naturals, I do think it's somewhat futile, and it is shifting the burden off of our own humility, resilience, and ultimately having an in-check temperance to where we don't need it all. It is okay. Would I have made more money in fitness had I hopped on steroids? Yes. Does money matter that much? No, not to that level. It just doesn't matter that much. And obviously we do want to make money. We do want to be well known. We want to guide people in the right direction too. We often, I know so much more about training than so many steroid users who I literally see go from worse than me to them way better than me, just because they went on drugs. Like, I've seen that over and over again in powerlifting, and then they're asked questions and they have really bad answers because they didn't have to figure this out. That does exist, but it doesn't bother me. And that's the whole point, is that's what we should aim for. ChatGPT shows a more jacked body than you. I don't give a fuck. I really don't. So a good way to put it is, obviously being natural doesn't make you a better person or anything like that. It's important not to be holier than thou. We're all flawed in deep ways. But being natural, it doesn't make you a better person than someone else, but within yourself, it makes you a better person that you are natural than if you aren't. Because you have better temperance, because you reject self-love more effectively, and because you're patient and more resilient to incentives that are very short-term, spontaneous, and fundamentally lack virtue, that they are against temperance categorically. And I do think not enough natural people do emphasize that yes, there is a component of that inherently to this topic. And I think that this all connects to why a lot of these pages, especially recently, these young teenagers, early 20s, guys like Togi, why they're promoting gambling is because, the foundational issue is not the end result. It's temperance itself. It's because you're promoting, this fast life, these drugs, these exogenous drugs, and then you're promoting gambling as a logical next end, because then it's all a matter of selling out whatever means necessary to make more money, even if that means selling your own soul and selling the pockets of your followers. And that, again, is why the argument of, well, if this was needed to get on, wouldn't you understand it more? It's like, no, because I think that's an awful mindset.